Hello, everyone. This is Logan Grendel, and you are back with us on the Focused on Infinity podcast. Welcome back. Today, I wanted to talk about something that just occurred to me the other day. I was looking at the way we do dining at restaurants and also the way we do weddings, and just wondering how things came to be the way that they are. And I'm still doing research on this, and I'm sure I might be hard pressed to find direct proof because a lot of this is conjecture. But just follow along with me on my thinking here. My thought is that there are a lot of things in society, especially American society, but American society has spread, pretty far and wide. And the way that we look at, say, going to a restaurant to eat. That seems to me to be something of an approximation of what royalty and the way that royalty would have done things a long time ago. A sort of middle and lower and even upper class approximation of what real wealth at the absolute top looked like back in the day. And the reason I think this is because there's not really any particular reason that everything isn't buffet style. I mean, there are buffet style eateries, and that is a different sort of thing, but that's less common, and is a different thing than the average experience. Usually, when you go to a restaurant, you expect to go in, sit down, have someone come and wait on you, essentially hand and foot, and how you treat them isn't even terribly important, though obviously if you don't treat your waiter or anyone serving you well, that is a giant red flag. For years, I've always said I always watch, if I'm on a date with someone or just hang out with someone in general, watch the way that they treat cab drivers and waiters and bus drivers and people who they view as servant class for them, because it's the people who you view as, finger quotes, lower than you, or people who can't really do anything for you. How you treat them says a lot about your character. And that also sort of ties into, my whole thought process that we're talking about now. So, you go to these places and you sit down and basically what you do is you're treated like royalty for your time in that restaurant. And tipping aside, because in other countries they don't tip because they actually pay waiters and waitresses enough, that they can live and survive. We don't do that here, and waiters and waitresses depend upon our tips, which is why if you're going out to eat in America, you absolutely must tip at least 15%. That's just that goes. I mean, it should go without saying, but I think there's a lack of understanding as to the fact that these people aren't really paid what they're worth by any stretch of the imagination. So they do depend on our tips, and they also have to tip out the bus boys and and other staff members that don't directly interact with the clientele. At any rate, what we really should think about is why we enjoy these experiences where we are sort of pretending to be temporary royalty, and what that means about our aspirations as a society. Why is it that we spend so much time looking up to and revering the extremely wealthy, and the royalty of our time? I mean, there's really no other way to look at it if you're looking at it reasonably than that certain people and certain positions, especially the most visible ones, are actors, actresses, Hollywood types, but also really powerful politicians and that sort of thing. These people are the royalty of our time. What they're interested in happening usually happens. The average person, there have been many studies which show that public opinion on issues has no effect on the passage of new laws and legislations. What has a one-to-one effect on the passage of new laws and legislations is what the wealthy want, what lobbyists and corporations want, and not just them, but these individual extremely wealthy people who have the power of the purse, essentially. So I say all this to say that societally we still have an issue with looking at the wealthy, at the modern day royalty, as if they are somehow better than us. And we're okay with their opinions and with their needs being met while ours are absolutely ignored and actually as our rights are stripped away day by day and moment by moment. So let's switching from restaurants to weddings. Now, the wedding industry is a gigantic industry, and whatever you think about weddings and marriage and the patriarchy, because again, no matter what you think of weddings emotionally, the fact of the matter is that weddings are a relic and a holdover from when a woman essentially was sold into the man's family, right? There's a reason that changing a woman changing her name to the husband's name, that's not just a convention because of tradition. It's a convention because it literally meant that, you know, patrilineal societies where you get the man's last name, that's the definition of patriarchy, right? It's impossible to say there is no patriarchy if you're a person that is thinking deeply at all without looking at whose last name you have, right? If you were raised by a single mother, you have your mother's name, and in a few instances you would take both names, or maybe you would even take your mother's name in very rare cases. But across the world, what we're talking about is an obvious patriarchal setup. And weddings, marriage itself, right? That's how you become a part of the man's family. Now, even though things are a bit different and, women have many more rights, even though things are not really as equal as they should be. And it also has to be said that, white women have more rights than indigenous women, than black women, than Hispanic women. But that's a different topic for a different day. Marriage itself, while I believe in the romantic aspects of it, the idea of deciding to be with a person for the rest of your life and deciding to shape your lives together, that's great. The idea of partnership, however you want to do your relationship, and if you are polyamorous person, et cetera, however it is that you're deciding to make your life with a person or people, that is 100% fine, and that's lovely. But what we have to remember is that the institution of marriage as we know it does not have very rosy underpinnings, if you're the woman especially. And why, then, getting back to the original topic, why is it that the wedding is such a giant to do, such a big, expensive process, and so much is put into it? Is it because that's how we really do want to do things as a species, as people? Or is it because that particular day is an approximation of a big coming out ceremony that would have been put on by royalty? Is it the one day where a man and woman get to be a king and queen, and all of their subjects come to look at them, to view them as they present themselves to the world, right? To come to bring and bestow upon them gifts, and they're regaled by musicians and sumptuous bounties and huge spread of food, et cetera, et cetera. The wedding is a giant pageant, and it's frankly far more expensive than lots of people can afford nowadays. And you have to go and get a wedding dress that is based on this sort of old European sort of style of doing things, and it comes in white to symbolize the purity of the bride and the virginal nature of the bride, which is just ludicrous, because I think if anyone's getting married and they're still a virgin, there's something very wrong. Sexuality is far too important a part of life, and far too important a part of the life that you're going to share with someone, not to have, to use a somewhat crass analogy, not to have taken it for a test drive before you decide to marry this person forever. And in a less, a tongue-in-cheek way of discussing it, what we're talking about is, how well do you know this person? You need to, if you're agreeing to be with this person for life, which is quite a commitment, you need to know them. You need to know everything about them, or at least as much of a person as can be known, to know that this is something that's going to work for you for the long term. So, the idea of being virginal going into a marriage. I mean, that has also some religious, very moralistic, Christianic, patriarchal ideas that are also very unpleasant. But at any rate, I think that we as a people should really look at our habits, because our institutions have failed us in so many ways that we're at a great point right now where we can look at which of them actually serve us, which of these things we actually want to do. Would we prefer a buffet style restaurants or more often? Maybe there'd be some of them that were like that, and everything would be cheaper because you don't have to have individual people waiting on you, and also people. I think when it's your responsibility to bust your own trays and to handle your own your own refuse, et cetera, et cetera, I think people do a little bit better of a job of taking care of things. We have enough of a throwaway culture as it is, and I think we exacerbate that in some of the ways we look at consuming and the cultural experiences that are part of being an American. And one of those is just the go someplace and just turn around and leave, rather than, okay, this is a place where other people have to go to. How am I contributing and how am I being detrimental to this sort of experience, right? What's wrong with the idea of taking your own trays back up, right? Something more of a like cafeteria style, because really the point of going out to eat is to hang out and spend time with people that you care about for one reason or the next, whether it's business or pleasure or family or dating, whatever it is. The idea of the whole thing is the relationships and sharing a meal. The extra trappings of being waited on, that's a different experience, right? That's something that doesn't necessarily have to be connected to the experience of dining. But we've sort of just taken it as read. And that's the difference between, say, fast food and the average restaurant experience, is how much you're being waited on. Not even really the quality of the food, though obviously that is an element as well. Now, I'm aware that everything going to buffet style and there not being as many waiters and waitresses would be detrimental to people who do that for a living. But I'm by no means anti-worker, so that's not where I'm coming from with this. What I'm saying is that in looking at the way that all our systems work, one of the things to look at is why we are doing things the way that we're doing them. And it all ties together, right? If we were paying people, first of all, that we viewed as this servant class enough to live on, then, them being willing to endure really poor treatment because they feel like it's their job wouldn't be a thing. And I feel like there's a base level of dignity that literally everyone should have. Now, I do believe in personal responsibility. I do believe that you can improve your station with ingenuity and hard work, et cetera, et cetera. But it's also not that easy to do with things the way that they are, because we have this sort of mentality that certain jobs just are not worth our respect. How many of us think of garbage men when we think of people who are really holding together society? People who really deserve the utmost respect for handling the absolute worst detritus of society. And without them, we would all be wading through garbage, waist deep, all getting sick, and there would be disease and things spreading like wildfire without proper removal of trash. And people who sanitation workers are paid better than a lot of people, and they do have, some union protections, et cetera, et cetera. So, and that's great. But I think that as far as the way that we discuss and think about sanitation workers, they should have a much more exalted position. The way we think of musicians and really famous musicians, they get a sort of reverence that is nearly deified, or again, going back to the beginning, like royalty. But why do we have royalty? Why do we need royalty? This is not feudalism, even though lots of arguments could be made that we do live in a neo-feudalist system, but it's not, on its face, a feudal society. Why then do we concentrate our attention to as few people as possible, seemingly? Shouldn't there be a wider net of local performers and people who work in our communities that do the work of entertaining us, and that we, there used to be local music scenes. When I was younger, I was in bands, and we played all the local spots, and we played CBGBs at one point. But it was kind of like New York had a music scene, but now there's not so much a music scene as just you go to shows of people who you've heard of because you saw them on TV or you saw them on Spotify, or et cetera, et cetera. So there is less of a focus on community and more of a focus on this sort of neo-royalty. So before I go too far afield, I just kind of wanted to put that thought out there, put that thought in your head. Why do we look at weddings and the restaurant dining experience the way we do? I think it's because we have internalized some of the notions of royalty that have been passed down to us from societies past. Looking forward, looking to the future, let's think about how we want to look at coupling. And I don't mean that like in terms of sex, but I mean in terms of becoming a unit, in terms of partnering, I guess is a better way to put it. Permanent partnering. Should we go back to things like, pagan rituals, or rituals like jumping the broom, like slave and African societies did back in the day? However we want to do it. Do we want hand fasting? Maybe hand fasting ceremonies. Maybe that's better, where you're just surrounded by some friends, and of course you like to eat and fellowship and hang out together. Of course, a big party, some sort of big to-do, just because it's a celebration. That, of course, makes sense, because I do believe that one of the strongest threads that goes through human existence is that of celebration. Marking important moments with ceremony and with pageantry and that sort of thing. But do we have to go to a bridal store, and do we have to go to the bouquet store? Like, do we have to jump through all the standard hoops that have been laid out so that a person feels like they had a proper wedding? I don't think we do. And I think us changing our thinking about even these things that we sort of take as a given is part of the way that we're going to be able to change society and human life in general for the better. Thank you for listening. This has been Logan Grendel, and this is the Focused on Infinity podcast. You can find us on SoundCloud and on Instagram and on YouTube. Please like and follow and share, and message me if you have any ideas or comments about anything that I've said here, anything to contribute, or anything you think I should talk about in future episodes. I appreciate your attention, and we'll see you soon. Grendel out.